Hey everybody, Daniel here. Welcome back for a brand new video. First of all, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of my new subscribers, and also a big thank you to all of my original subscribers that have been on since the first video. Thank you guys so much. You don't know how much all of the support means to me. So in today's video, we are going to be comparing my two systems here. We have my Intel-based machine here, and then over to my left here, we have my AMD system. You guys saw me build this computer in my two more videos ago. If you haven't seen that, click right up here and you guys can go watch that video before continuing on with this one. So let's get right into it. First, we'll list some components that don't really require too much detail. My Intel system uses two 16GB sticks of Crucial Ballistix RAM. The AMD system uses two 8GB sticks of G.SKILL Ripjaws V. As for the storage in the Intel system, I'm using a 1TB Toshiba NVMe SSD, 1TB Western Digital Blue SATA SSD, an extra 512GB OCZ SSD, and finally a 2TB Seagate Barracuda HDD to store the videos for this channel. In the AMD machine, I'm using a 500GB Crucial NVMe SSD and a 1TB Samsung 860 QVO SSD. Both systems use 750-watt power supplies with 80+ gold efficiency ratings, Intel using an EVGA Supernova, and AMD using a Thermaltake ToughPower Grand RGB. Now we can begin looking at the cases. For my Intel system, I went with the Thermaltake Core P3 Snow Edition. This is a full tower ATX case with a completely open air design. It's a little more expensive with a price tag of about $140 on Amazon. The Core P3 is quite versatile with its mounting options. You can have it standing like a traditional tower, lying flat on its side with the included rubber feet, or even mount it up on a wall using the pre-drilled holes. All mounting options will use the included tempered glass panel. Thermaltake also includes a PCIe riser cable to mount the graphics card vertically, and that's the way I decided to mount mine. As for my AMD system, I decided to go with a more budget-friendly option in the Cooler Master MasterBox MB311L. When I purchased the case, it only cost about $60 on Amazon, but the prices seem to have gone up quite a bit since then. This is a micro ATX case that requires you to go with either a micro ATX, mini ITX, or mini DTX motherboard. The MB311L comes with two pre-installed RGB 120mm fans in the front panel. Also included is an RGB controller that can be controlled by your motherboard manufacturer's RGB software, or by simply wiring the case's reset button to the controller so you can change the light show by the touch of a button. This case is quite small and will not take up much space on a desk. A slight drawback was limited space for cable management. I took the hard drive cage out of the case since I won't be installing any 3.5-inch hard drives, which gave me more room to tuck cables away. Now let's move over to the motherboards. The motherboard in the Intel system is the Asus ROG Strix Z390E Gaming. This motherboard goes for about $235 on Amazon. It has an integrated I/O panel on the rear face, which means you won't have to fiddle with installing one in the rear of your case. This board has pretty easy to navigate BIOS, and it's not too hard to overclock if you know what settings to manipulate. I recommend watching a YouTube video or reading through the owner's manual to have a better understanding of all the settings. The motherboard comes with a small cooling fan for the VRMs, which I've installed, but is completely unnecessary. I'm not trying to break any records in terms of overclocking, but I installed the fan anyway. There are two M.2 slots on the board, both of which are covered by a metal plate with a thermal pad underneath to provide thermal dissipation for your M.2 drives. The board has built-in RGB in the top left corner, which adds a nice pop of color to the otherwise dark look. Over to the AMD system, we have the MSI B450M Mortar Titanium. This is an awesome motherboard coming in at about $150, but I can't seem to find the board for sale anymore. So I'm glad I bought it when I saw it on Amazon. I went with this option after hearing Buildzoid, a fellow YouTuber from Actually Hardcore Overclocking, talk so highly of it. I'll leave a link to his channel in the description. This is of course a micro ATX motherboard which fits perfectly in this case. The board has RGB lights on the back that shine onto the case's motherboard tray. This board was ready for 3rd gen AMD CPUs right out of the box, meaning I didn't have to update the BIOS when building the system. This board also has two M.2 slots, however they do not come with heat sinks or thermal pads. I got around this by ordering my own heatsink, which complements the red and black aesthetic I went with. The titanium finish on this board looks amazing and really pops with all the lights inside the case. Next, we'll talk about the graphics cards. For the Intel system, I moved the EVGA RTX 2070 Super Black Gaming into this system since this one does much more than the AMD system. This is my desktop gaming / video editing rig, and I needed the more powerful card in the system since I'm using DaVinci Resolve as my editing software. Also, I wanted the better card for a better gaming experience in shooters at 1440p. For pretty much all titles I play, I manage about 70 to 100 FPS with most all settings maxed out. In the AMD system, I have the EVGA RTX 2070 XC Ultra. This is of course a non-Super Edition card, but that doesn't mean I'm seeing drawbacks in performance. This card is doing everything I need it for sim racing in VR. I use the Oculus Rift CV1 or Consumer version 1, which is capped at 90 Hz. I stay pretty much locked at 90 FPS in all titles that support VR. As for any titles that don't support VR, mainly F1 2019, or the entire F1 franchise by Codemasters for that matter, I've seen frame rates upwards of 140 FPS at 1080p with everything maxed out. Now, on to the cooling solutions. Since the CPU in my Intel machine sees much higher temps than the AMD build ever will, I moved the Arctic Liquid Freezer 2 240mm all-in-one or AIO liquid cooler over to this system. This radiator is much thicker, which allows for more coolant capacity. I bought this AIO from Newegg for about $95. A very good feature of this AIO is that both the pump and fan speeds are completely controlled within the BIOS, using the CPU fan connector on the motherboard. There is no software to download, nor will you need to use a USB 2.0 header in order to control anything. For the AMD machine, I'm using the EVGA CLC or closed loop cooler 240mm AIO liquid cooler. I don't see temps higher than 65 degrees Celsius during Cinebench runs, and gaming doesn't go any higher than maybe 45 to 50 degrees Celsius. This cooler will take up a USB 2.0 header to be able to control fans and of course the RGB lighting using EVGA's flow control software. This AIO is the same price as the aforementioned Arctic cooler. Now, let's move on to the processors. In my Intel machine, I have their flagship CPU, the Intel i9-9900K. This is an 8-core, 16-thread processor that handles all of my 1440p gaming and editing videos for this channel. Currently, I have the CPU overclocked to 5 GHz at 1.29 volts. This is definitely a hot little chip since it sees temps of 80 to 85 degrees Celsius during heavy loads like a Cinebench run or rendering videos using DaVinci Resolve. This CPU is getting up into the enthusiast level of gaming given its price of about $550. Unless you want really high clock speeds or a few extra frames per second in some games, getting this processor really doesn't seem to be a very good idea right now since you can get very comparable performance from AMD for less money. Now, over to my AMD system. I decided to go with one of their best price to performance options in the AMD Ryzen 5 3600X. This is their most powerful Zen 2 6-core 12-thread processor. I have it overclocked to 4.2 GHz at 1.3 volts. I honestly couldn't be happier with this CPU for its price. I believe I paid about $210 for it. However, if you wanted to save about $30 to $40, you could get the Ryzen 5 3600, non-XQ of course, and get just as good performance in games. I believe the only drawback is that the 3600X can boost up to 4.4 GHz, while the 3600 can do 4.2 GHz. Comparing gameplay doesn't really seem like a fair fight with these two builds, but we'll at least see how the AMD machine stacks up against the Intel build. The most demanding game I play regularly is Call of Duty Modern Warfare. This is of course at 1440p resolution. The Ryzen 5 3600X paired with the RTX 2070 XC Ultra handle the game just fine, with everything maxed out, the exception of leaving RTX off. There are certainly some times where you can see the system struggling. For example, playing a game on the remastered Rust map with the active sandstorm happening, you can see the system just beginning to struggle. If I played at 1080p, I'm sure I wouldn't notice these problems at all. I just don't have a high-end 1080p monitor to test with. The only time both machines seem to have a hard time, and this may just be an issue with Modern Warfare, is the transition from respawning after dying. Sometimes there is a big frame dip, even seeing the 1% lows and 0.1% lows dropping to 0. However, as soon as you get moving in game, you're back to normal. If you stuck around this long, guys, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, guys, get subscribed, hit that like button, click the bell notification so you get notified for all future videos. And if you want to support the channel, head over to my Patreon so you can leave a donation. Thanks again, guys. Have a good one.